Namaskar. Do we really understand ourselves? Know thyself. This has been told to us since times immemorial, be it the Vedas or in the Delphic maxims. However, do we even understand our own bodies? When it comes to proactive well-being, do we have any conclusively proven options today? Ayurveda is one of the few extant traditions of medicine developed in ancient times that is still widely practiced in modern times, even though many, particularly in the Western world, doubt its claims. Ayurveda, or the science of life, is a discipline of the Upved, or auxiliary knowledge in the Vedic tradition, and its origins are found in the Atharva Veda. The key question is that if we have a system that can be experimented on and empirically proven, is that valid, or is it still pseudo-science, as Johannes Quack calls Ayurveda? Our guest for today, Professor Balram Singh, is professor and president at the Institute of Advanced Sciences in Massachusetts in the United States. Professor Balram, you have been a chemist by training and a pioneer in studying the bio-enhancing properties of Bhasma, ash products used in Ayurveda, using contemporary characterization techniques. You've undertaken seminal work in the direction of verifying Ayurvedic practices and materials through a scientific lens. Your efforts to popularize Ayurvedic practices by appealing to the rational and scientific side of those who may benefit from their usage is noteworthy. You've also recently dabbled in the realm of exploring the fundamental basis of reality in the universe, a subject that I have been working on myself as well. I would like to welcome you, sir.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
So, Professor, your monumental body of work and papers such as that on the use of chemistry to understand Vedic knowledge in the journal Contemporary Views on Indian Civilization have made quite an impact. And for me, they have brought to the fore some novel perspectives on a subject that people both know and do not know about. What are your views on Ayurveda as an effective modern mode of treating ailments, and more importantly, facilitating comprehensive proactive well-being?
Well, Ayurveda is, I think it has a huge potential at this point of time that I see, especially when we are talking about the entire world. In India, it has been practiced, as you alluded to, for thousands of years. And it is a knowledge system that is indigenous, and it has been bottoms up, which means, in the theory of sciences, as you would imagine, is in the inductive way of learning, which means you collect things bottoms up and then you build up a theory. And so Ayurveda is one of those, and has, I think, a huge potential, as I said. The most important thing at this point in terms of Vedic view of this, and Ayurveda obviously is, as you mentioned in your intro, is a Upaveda of Vedic tradition. So the question is, to me, has been that, and coming from our modern scientific training, is that how to communicate it, and how to make it practical, and how to universalize it. Universalize, I don't mean that there's one particular drug or one particular process, one particular a system of diagnostics. It's not like that. I think Ayurveda recognizes that. It recognizes the multiplicity. It recognizes the diversity. It recognizes the locality. And so that is a system, which is a system of diversity, but which is slightly different than modern science, which talks about everything uniformity. And sometimes it evolves into universality, but when it comes to uniformity, we are all different. And Ayurveda recognizes that difference, that we are all different. Not only we are all different at any given time.
Right.
Even we are different from each. Myself, I am different from what I was maybe a moment ago. And Ayurveda is one of those very, I think, from what I understand, and I'm a biophysical chemist, so I have a little bit of understanding of physics and chemistry and biology. And in all the areas that I see, there is a huge potential of Ayurvedic system for not only for making medical system and treatment, but actually to understand the world. and which would mean that it will touch on every aspect, so many aspects of life, almost every aspect, I would say. And that's why the name Ayurveda means really the knowledge of life. It's not just a medical system, it is really a living system.
So, I mean, that ties into my next question to you. I mean, and in one of your works, you mentioned that these qualities and the basis of qualities of matter in Ayurveda, and that is, it is the interplay of these qualities that, underlies the whole idea and, the practice of Ayurveda itself. But you also go on to mention that qualities and the basis of qualities are mostly conceptual. So does that mean that we cannot think, in a reductionist fervor of modern science, of a basic structural Ayurveda, and rather have to think in a more kind of functional form, so to say, in this formalism?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I've been grappling with this. This is not that easy. My introduction could also include that I work with the world's most toxic substance, which is botulinum neurotoxin. And I used to have this question when I started, 35 years ago or so. A lot of people will ask me question when I make presentation that how could this be the same thing be poison and the most toxic substance and also medicine, and right now it's most versatile medicine, I would say, in terms of Botox and other brand names, but basically based on the same substance. And so the concept of qualities really comes from there. The guna and karma. Guna and karma is a concept of Vaisesika philosophy, and I got introduced to that when I became the director of Center for Indic Studies at the University of Massachusetts, and I started delving into Indian philosophy. Then I found that you have to really understand the concept of this guna and karma, and then only from that you can find. So there are 9 elements of substance. They call it dravya actually, but there are 9 elements of, I'm translating that as a matter or substance. And in that one, there is a time and space. And time and space is like what I mentioned earlier. When you add time, you are not the same substance anymore. So every moment you will be different, and Ayurvedic practice recognizes that. So that's one. The second one is space. The concept of space is very, very important in Ayurveda. That in which they give certain amount which can be, actually it's not only Ayurveda, I think it's a concept of Vaisesika philosophy, but applies to everything. It applies to botulinum toxin. If you give molecule less space, it becomes toxic. If you give it more space, just like any human beings, if you put people, 1,000 people in a room, there is no way they're going to be comfortable, or actually they will be toxic. They will break the rooms and chairs and tables. It's the same way about the molecules, any molecules, actually, in any behavior. So your question about concept, this conceptually has to be understood. I know in chemistry, actually, both of them are true. In chemistry, we make, if we put things together and, the reaction occurs, you just take time. But we also know that if you change the concentration, reactions occur faster. In that is also acceptable and has been done as experiment. So the concept of this conceptually, this idea actually leads to further, which is very important for Ayurvedic, and that one is that mind. The Ayurveda accepts mind. Now, this modern science does not accept mind, and they're realizing it slowly and slowly that there is a stress, and there is actually the stress is cause of many of the diseases. But Ayurveda recognized a long time ago. And not only that, it gets into the Atma. Right. So out of the 9 elements, there are Panchabhutas, time and space, mind and Atma. So that concept, that's what I think I was trying to refer to, is that you have to understand this conceptually as to what it is, because you may not be able to prove directly, but once you make the concept, And it's not that difficult, actually. You know, when I got exposed to this, Mrittunjoy, I started teaching a course at the graduate level.
Right.
It's called Chemistry of the Mind. Okay. And I was very fortunate to be able to convince my department in the chemistry department that I can teach chemistry of the mind, because I got this concept a little bit from Vaisesika and then practically from Ayurveda, that I should explore it. Yeah. And so that concept has been very, very helpful. And I think that is what I was referring to.
Right, right. I mean, that's a very important point. And I think there are some elements, there are some, aspects which you mentioned, which obviously modern science may call even speculative for that matter. I mean, including, the Atman and various other aspects, even the mind. I mean, I myself have been working on mind matter in the Cavendish with Professor Brian Josephson. But the important bit is to kind of look at least for the Western kind of critics, as we may call them, how Ayurveda is increasingly being examined through the modern scientific lens, right? So in recent years, we have seen a number of scientific articles on such studies of Ayurveda. So how do you see this going forward as we, move along in the study of Ayurveda and the ways of applying it in today's time?
I think it's very important. I think it's a baby step, though. I mean, I myself have tried to do a few aspects of Ayurveda and approach, and I'm still approaching. Actually, I'm still doing some experiments and trying to understand. But my approach now is less of trying to confirm Ayurveda. Right. I'm actually in the mode of trying to learn from Ayurveda, because, like you said, it is mind and other things speculative. Yeah. So you can just imagine when I talk to my department chair that I want to teach chemistry of mind and what might be his reaction. And he just said that, well, how about chemistry of brain? I said, that is so obvious. Right. Everybody teaches. I want to go beyond. And he said, well, that's more philosophy and psychology. Right. It's not a physical science, actually. And so I said, is chemistry not the central science? And he said, yes, it is. Of course, who would say it's not? I mean, people do accept that chemistry is the central science, right, between physics and biology. Yes. And so I said, if anything exists, we should be able to study. Right. And he said, yes. I said, so his name was Don Smith. I said, Don, do you have mind? Yeah. And it was a difficult question for him. and he took, I think, good 30 seconds to say yes. And I said, do you think I have mind? And he was readily acceptable and accepting of that. And that's where the journey began. So he did, even though it's speculative, but it is really, it makes you step back and think about it. I mean, we have it. Yeah. We just, we did not find it from external point of view, from external observation, but it is an internal observation. So now going back to your question about, how can we use scientific methodology or scientific tools, modern scientific tools. Yeah, we can use the physical, chemical, biological systems, which has been used, actually, like, for example, energy. You can use. I'm fascinated by what is pranic energy, right, and I'm exploring it. Probably we'll talk to you offline because you're a physicist. It will be an interesting conversation and discussion. I have gone to Baba Ramdev's Patanjali Institute, talked to Acharya Balkrishna about it, talked to so many other people who are Ayurvedic experts. I've gone to Shankaracharya Puri, who apparently knows more about Panchabhutas and other things, to try to find out the physics of pranic energy, what exactly that damn thing is. Yeah. And on the other hand, there are people, including my lab, has done some work on biology of it, which is the genetic expression, the gene types and, that kind of basis of Ayurveda. And there people have found certain types of genes are being expressed more in, if you look at the prakriti, the body, the doshas, yes, and metabolic differences have been found and other things. And then there is a whole lot of chemistry, which is about all the jadi booty, the herbals, and and understanding the chemical reactions as to what is happening in terms of FDA approval of certain types of drugs. And, so I have seen all of that, but I think they're all lacking something, and which is so Ayurvedic.
Right.
So for example, FDA approval thing of a drug thing, and I have developed a few things in my modern science field, as well as in some Ayurvedic things, and there are some conventions. So it is not really, in my opinion, science is not something that is fixed, just like Veda is not something like fixed.
Right. Yeah.
Although some scientists will frown upon saying that, well, you're going to have mind now, and then you're going to include that in. But there is a way to explain and carry that out, in my opinion. I have been successful to a certain degree with my colleagues to understand that, especially because of my experience with chemistry of mind, and I have published a few things, and I can rationalize it, and I learned a lot in this process. So I think Ayurvedic concepts could be scientific. Right. I think this is, and actually science will benefit tremendously if we brought some of those concepts.
Right. There are various important and interesting points there. So obviously you spoke about the whole idea of pranic energy and energy itself. You spoke about the life forces, the three doshas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. So I would like you to kind of tell us a little more about these, in traditional Ayurveda, the role that it plays and the central role that it plays within the Ayurvedic framework.
So yeah, I think, my understanding again, Mrittunjoy, is that anything that we create in this world, it's just our own model of trying to understand things. It's not the reality, it's probably not that. Right. But that's the perspective to approach something. So Vata, Pitta, Kapha is a way of broadly defining people's body and mind. Yeah. This does include, Vata, Pitta, Kapha does include mind in it for sure. And actually it is sitting on the platter of Atma. And I have been able to convince anybody that all three exist. Physico-chemical body or biological thing exists. Our mind also exists, like I was able to convince my department chair that mind does exist. Right. And now I also, it's not that difficult to tell people that Atma exists. Well, they will say, what is Atma? Who has seen Atma? Nobody knows. What is this? Is all speculative, just like you said. Right. Well, you see your mind, right? When I'm talking to you, you probably, your mind went to Cambridge University, your mind went to some professor's discussion while I'm talking about all this, right? Right. And you know that it is going in Cambridge University, it went to Calcutta, it went to Delhi, and you're thinking about all the people that you may have interacted with and science classes you may have taken. So you know that it is your mind is traveling. And who is that you? Right. There is something which is observing your mind. And I say that's Atma. And anybody can test it. It is not something you don't need to sit in the ashram and close your eyes to think of whether Atma will be coming. Yes. Atma it's a witness. And actually that witness is very important in science. So I say science is we are observant. We are supposed to be observing, right? Right. So we are observing through our senses. Yeah. But then our senses is being observed or monitored by mind. Our mind is traveling and is being observed by something that still tells us that my mind is here, my mind is there. So actually this is very practical. Now, once it becomes very practical, it becomes very accessible to science. And this is where I think the game is for Ayurveda to be able to communicate that concept. Yeah. So Vata, Pitta, Kapha is a broad classification of people, which is so obvious. People, you can just see them. Right. The way anybody can find classification there. Yeah. I think the trick though is that it is not just, somebody is not just Vata, somebody is not just Pitta, somebody is not just Kapha. Yeah. So there is an infinite combination of these things, and that has to be examined, and that has not been examined in my opinion. Right.
there was this very important point about reflexivity. That is the word, I guess, many people have used in terms of the witness, the observer-based kind of formalism. And within, quantum physics, in modern science, for that matter, we have that being central at the moment. I'll come to that in a further question. But before that, I would like to know that in one of your studies, you mentioned about these doshas and how they relate to, biological and physiological kind of, movements and processes, for instance. You briefly mentioned right now as well. So you speak about the biomotor, or that which relates to the bodily movements. You talk about the metabolic, or that which leads to chemical processes that maintain life, and the preservative or homeostasis activities. And you draw a comparison between this, very modern kind of framework, an ambit of these activities with the dosha perspective in Ayurveda. So what motivated you to draw this comparison, when you did it?
Well, I mean, this is not, I did not create this. Has been going on, I think, earlier.
Right.
Other people have done. I just use it.
Okay.
I just use it to explain or understand what I am doing.
Right.
And like I said, this is just some kind of classification that earlier was just three types of classification. Now this is more dynamics.
Right.
So there is a transportation, there is transformation, and there is preservation.
Yeah.
And I mean, our body, of course, is doing all the time.
Right.
There is air which is being transported. There are molecules which are being transported.
Yeah.
So anybody can understand that. And there is a transformation because all metabolism is happening. And then there is a storage of fat or all kind of other the bones and other things which are kind of static.
Yeah.
So that process is continuing. So that's kind of, there is a engineer, and I'm forgetting right now his name. I think Shiva. His name is Shiva. Ayadurai or Shiva. I remember the first name. Is in Boston actually, and he's an engineer, and he uses these three to explain operation of anything.
Right.
Which is really absolutely true. Operation of this computer is also in those three: storage, transformation, and flow.
Yeah.
So almost anything is like an engineering process. I think people in Ayurveda realized the dynamics. Again, I go back to the same thing. This is the infinite combination of these.
Right.
That what is really important, and that is not what we are able to capture. Even despite the computational competence that we have, or right now the capability that we have. I have done some computational work with a collaborator from University of Massachusetts Lowell campus. His name is Valeri Barskov, and we have published molecular computational calculations. A molecule, how a molecule moves. All three things can be applied to a molecule. A molecule moves, a molecule changes, and a molecule retains certain things.
Yes.
And we have done calculations only at the microsecond level, not even millisecond, because it takes 3-4 days, a molecule of, let's say, 1500 amino acids or so, it takes 3 days to do that at microsecond level. The computer system he had, I asked him whether he can model a cell, for a minute or so. He said, no way. He says a cell right now, all the computer capability that we have, a cell cannot be monitored for 1 second. That's all the millions of cells that we have, and being affected by gazillion things around us, which is our surrounding. So it is not possible, at least to explain at this point, scientifically everything that is going on, and that is important for understanding Ayurvedic principles and Ayurvedic practice. So I think it'll take a while, or there may be another way, which I think has been there. I mean, obviously, people didn't have computer, that they have figured it out. So there is another way to approach it, and I think we need to explore that as well.
Right. So that's very insightful. So much like the manner in which everything in the body is said to be intrinsically interconnected as per Ayurvedic works. And I think that the idea of comprehensiveness and the idea of integration is something which is very central, be it in terms of the life forces, be it in terms of the gunas which work together. And there are various permutations and combinations, as you rightly put it. So in recent medical studies, it has been seen that biochemical profiles like liver function tests, lipid profiles, and so on, are related to each other, and they have a very kind of intrinsically connected and related kind of functionality. So how do you see these biochemical and hematological dynamics of modern medicine and the biology of the human body through the prism of Ayurveda, particularly in terms of doshas and the prakriti types, essentially?
Yeah, so again, we are just trying to understand Ayurveda from some of the things that we can know in modern science, biochemistry and molecular biology. And so there are, I mean, right now, I think the modern science is at the level of genome. They're trying to find out the genotypes of these things, like what you mentioned, of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And genes is like I mean, even in modern science, it is like a dinosaur, that's the gene is a dinosaur now, because we know that there is gene, and then we are eventually that is the basis of whatever we are. But actually what we are is not what the gene is, but how the gene is expressed.
Right.
And how the gene is expressed is not just a natural phenomenon of certain instructions, but something that improvises, depending on your situation, where you are thinking, where you are, and who you are with, and what have been you eating, and what is the season, and what are all kind of stuff. So even gene expression is affected. Now and also interestingly, what your sanskaras are. Now sanskara is very important in Ayurveda. The sanskaras, people don't, they don't believe in mind. Right now they have difficulty accepting mind. The sanskaras is even like previous life. How the hell that happens? Because that is very important. Now, why the sanskaras? The people don't understand that, how could that happen? Now, there is, I'm sure you're familiar with epigenetics.
Yes.
So epigenetics is the one which continues from one generation to another generation. So sanskaras in chemical sense are something that, let's say I have a thought. That thought has all kind of reactions in my body, or maybe I have a vision, I'm affected by something I see around me. That gets encoded in my biochemistry. And that biochemistry gets into every cell, including my sperm and ovum of a woman. And that is the way that continues the sanskara that people don't realize.
Right.
Now, slowly, I think they will accept that idea also, that there is a scientific basis of sanskaras.
Right.
And so that also affects. So it's not only, now we are talking about multiple lives, people talking about rebirths, and how does that work? But I think if really logically, if you start thinking about it, all that fits in it. And unfortunately, to your question, it complicates.
Right.
So it makes it more complex.
Right.
And I think that is called life. Make it things very complex. It's called life, and Ayurveda is master of it. And again, I'm not avoiding to answer the algorithm question. I am just trying to allude to how complex it is, that even there has to be an algorithm of algorithm. Has to be
meta algorithm, yes.
Meta algorithm to be able to even approach it. And I tell you this, I get very sometimes excited and sometimes very much concerned about science, especially when it comes to Indian tradition. So I actually invited once, many times you make presentation like, 20 minutes presentation, 40 minutes presentation in a conference, and, you do hand waving, like, I can keep, here also we are not really going in the details, but at least we are addressing some of the questions. But there, somebody stands up and says something. And then, we have ours, like I said, sanskaras, I'm explaining sanskaras differently than what, somebody will just simply say, we have sanskaras, is written in such and such book, and this is what it is.
Right.
So I actually invited once about half a dozen scientists, and I hosted them for a week.
Right.
I said, you take whatever time you damn thing you take, but explain everything that you want to talk about.
Right.
And I really, there was one of the presenters, really, he used mathematics to explain Vedas.
Okay.
And he talked about mathematically how the transformation, the fourth dimension of transformation, and he quoted from Vedas, from Rig Vedas, that how there is a tesseract. There is a tesseract which keeps changing. Every moment. I'm just talking about this change time in our Vaisheshik philosophy, and how that changes, and that he defined that as a Ishvara.
Okay.
Now, Ishvara is not something that you just do puja.
Yes.
Ishvara is something that you practice. And so, there are some concepts like that, Mrittunjoy, that those concepts need to be pursued in a very methodical way. And I think then algorithm will become part of it, because if you don't have the features, the concept, the traits, the characteristics, then what would you do with algorithm? Because we don't even have that. And I think, unfortunately, Ayurvedic training right now in India is very static. It's not dynamic, and that is a concern. Why it's not moving forward? You have to delve into it. Whatever I'm a chemist. I was taught how to do some photosynthesis and membrane or something like that. But, now I'm delving into some of these new ideas, and which is just conceptually, like you said in the beginning, there are concepts. But everything with the electron is a concept also. What the hell? Nobody knows what exactly the electron is, because if you deep down, as a physicist, you would know it. If you really start looking at what electron is, you find there is nothing really. What atom is, there is nothing. It's just some kind of force. So ultimately, you just get to the same level, like, well, this is just a concept. But, eventually we are able to give some kind of weightage to that force, and then we can make a model, and then we are seeing this. So I think Ayurveda can also be addressed, but I think it will be probably nth order of whatever we are able to do at this time for the modern science.
I think that's a very important point, because as you rightly said, even in physics, for that matter, we are trying to see about the nature of reality, and I'll come to that shortly. But the whole idea that is there really anything which is beyond, let's say, what we call the tensor kind of various variables, properties which come together to define something which is out there. So that is a very important point, and I think that has to be delved into more. You mentioned about genomes and the manner in which various variables, let's say in the environment around us, kind of get influenced and get expressed in terms of the genomic activities. So speaking of intracellular dynamics, in one of your writings, I was reading about where you mentioned that Ayurveda speaks of how the incomplete digestion of proteins may leave peptides of varying lengths. Right, so this was a very specific kind of instance where you delved into something which was an intracellular kind of dynamics related point. So is there any specific textual evidence to claim that Ayurveda has discussed, let's say, the subject of decomposition of proteins and gone into the whole domain of not exactly genomics necessarily, but in terms of the very minuscule of the life units that we have out there?
So I honestly don't know if Ayurveda has gone into that details. What I think I know is that they talk about Jataragni. They think that the basis of everything is your tummy. Right. Everything, whatever happens in your stomach, they think all the problems in our body and all the solutions in our body stays in the stomach. Yeah. And so there are two aspects of that. One is there is a microbiome, and that has now modern science has accepted. So it's not just the food that your nutrition that you're getting, but something more than nutrition that is controlling. Number two is there is a vagus nerve that is connected our stomach, the gut to the brain, and 80% of neurotransmissions in our body actually happen between the gut and the brain. So that's very fascinating. Now, what are why I said about this nutrition, more the biopeptides in food digestion, it is my way of approaching it, because it couldn't be just simply like you ate the food, you got amino acids, you got the carbohydrates, and you got energy, and you're done with it. As we know now, actually, there is the complexity of the microbiome is humongous, and it's very different for individuals, because the kind of bacteria that you will have host in your stomach is not only related to your body, but also your mind. And everybody is different in terms of how they think and what they do. And that affects that. Now, the food is like a third factor, because that's kind of makes you survive. So I got this idea from, A2 milk. They have A1 milk and they have A2 milk. Yes, Indian cows have A2 milk for some reason. All the Indian cows have A2 milk. All the American cows have A1 milk. And then there are some in betweens all over the world. Some people have made industry out of it. And, I got very fascinated by that story, because the difference between those two are the digestion of one particular point. In one place, when it cleaves because of some mutation in the casein, the protein that is for our nutrition, there is a 7 amino acid peptide that gets released in A1 milk. That is not one in A2 milk. And that acts as a hormone. It kind of changes your physiology. It changes you. How does it do physiology? I think there are more studies being done, but it definitely, there are many hormones which are small peptides. And so then there are many growth hormones. There are many all kind of molecules in our body. They are active. Biologically, they are active. So we did some experiment in our lab, and we just did what is known as gastric simulated digestion. Okay. So you can do in the test tube. It's all very well known. And I work with botulinum toxin, which is the food poison. So we kind of are familiar with that kind of stuff. Right. And so we said that let's just put some proteins and see what do we get to amino acid. We didn't. We got actually dozens of other peptides. And we have not done, we wrote to NIH at that time, didn't get funded. So it has been in the back burner. We would like to pursue it more. And I started that research again. So I think that from our data, we get these peptides of various sizes, and we know that we need to screen them as to which ones are doing what and to whom. They are doing something to our gut, number one, because there is a huge mucosal layer. And I'm, again, a little bit familiar with that because of botulinum toxin, the food poison, and we understanding the mechanism by which it goes and how the tiny things affect, including Bhasma, that I'm sure you are interested in talking about, is how does that affect? And then also how all this affects the microbiome. Right. People have bloating. The bloating is not because you created gas, actually. Right. It is the bacteria which creates the gas in your body. Right. So when you eat certain types of food, the bacteria gets revved up and says, what's going on here? And they start functioning and you get gas. Right. So it is that kind of observation, some molecular observation, some physiological understanding, something from the literature about milk, and our thinking, our approach of trying to find out how Ayurveda works, which I'm really very fascinated with that, both at the physics level, both at the chemistry level, and also biology level. And that's how I started thinking about that.
That's very fascinating. And also, I think one aspect you mentioned was this whole idea of experimentation that you have been looking at and trying to pursue. But, when it comes to a proper scientific kind of, methodology, obviously there are a lot of different influences on, human prakriti and doshas for that matter, so everything from seasonal changes to mental state, dietary intake, as you mentioned briefly. So in any experimental verification of this manner, an extent of, where there is so much of dependence, across various variables, one of the key things that is obviously done is to control some of the factors and try to kind of influence, see the influence of, let's say, one or two specific factors on the state of the system. So I was very curious because, this is coming from a purely scientific kind of perspective. How do you even conceptualize a control experimental assessment, of this kind of a dependence? Because these are not only kind of spatially or, factor-wise diverse, but they're also temporally kind of, expanded in time, for instance, right? So how do you conceptualize such a control experimental assessment to see how these different variables and factors can affect the prakriti and doshas of an individual, let's say?
Yeah, I mean, this is a humongous question you're asking.
Right.
So, I mean, the way these things are worked.
Yeah.
I work in biology, and so when I have like whole cell,
Right.
I have bunch of things that we add in it,
right.
and so you sometimes, it depends on what your purpose is. It's like if I want to check the role of these biopeptides, so I can digest them for nth order, let's say completely, there's no biopeptide left, as an example, will be my first control. I will be doing first control where I digest it completely to amino acids. There is no peak, and we did HPLC and mass spectroscopy, and then we just find that there are only amino acids left, nothing else is left. So we at least know that, and then you use this and treat with, I mean, dosa is really too far right now. Human beings are too far. I'm talking about cellular level.
Right.
I would like to do this experiment at cellular level. I mean, we can take intestinal cells and grow them in the lab and expose them to these so-called biopeptides of different levels of digestion, and complete digestion and no digestion.
Right.
So my control will be no digestion, complete digestion, and various levels of digestions, and see the response in the cell. I'm not even ready to talk about dosas and other things. Whatever other barriers.
Yeah.
This is the limitation of modern science, which is again, I want to emphasize that somehow Ayurvedic system, the Vaidyas, they do have all this. They don't. I mean, for example, they look at your nail.
Right.
For God's sake, and then they kind of try to diagnose, because this is the color of your nail or something about your tongue diagnostics, or something to do with your nose, something to do with your breathing, something to do with your nadi. All these things are cumulative effect of all this. What you're talking about, we will do some algorithm. It's the effect of the, and there is this kind of sensation. I'm not saying that's a perfect. I really think that, you have to be really, really good. I'm not convinced. I haven't met one who can do all this. But the point I'm trying to say, that to run the control, to understand the science is one thing, to apply it to reality is entirely different thing, and which is true, by the way, of physics as much as to Ayurveda. Because in physics, talking about quantum or talking about thermodynamics, in the thermodynamics, you have what? System and surrounding. Damn thing is, one electron is a system, everything else is surrounding, right? The moment you focus on one electron, that becomes system, everything else becomes surrounding. Can you imagine that? How much of that?
Yeah.
How will you run that control?
Absolutely.
How will you run that control in time? So now that is the answer to Ayurvedic, this question. If anybody asks this question, how are you going to do this? To me, and does that make any sense of what I'm doing?
Right.
I don't think it makes any sense what I'm doing, but I don't think it makes any sense of having an electron also.
Yeah.
So if the electron makes a sense with all this is surrounding, then my Ayurvedic experiment also makes a sense with all kind of changes.
So, I mean, I totally relate to that, because in quantum mechanics, you mentioned about, electrons, but in quantum mechanics, for instance, this whole effect of the environment and the noisy environment, for that matter, and things known as, the effect known as decoherence kind of removes the quantumness of various particles. So it's kind of, it's very tough. It requires a lot of different kinds of conditions and things to kind of maintain the quantumness. So I completely get that, and it's quite tough, I'm sure. In the past, there has been this aspect which, the Food and Drug Administration Agency, and I'm asking this because you have already addressed this point, briefly, about how the FDA has been, you have been engaging with them. But in the past, the FDA of the United States has said that 1 in 5 Ayurvedic medicines have been found to contain certain, substances, lead, mercury, and arsenic, substances that are known to be harmful to humans, and has banned some of the medicines in the US, right? So since Bhasma as well comprises of certain kinds of metallic powders and pieces, will it not have an adverse impact on the, human physiology? And how can we resolve this predicament? Because, clearly this has been used as a point of misprojection to portray all of Ayurveda in a slightly negative light, in the US and elsewhere as well. So how do we resolve this predicament?
So there are so many issues about drug. And FDA was, from what I understand, was formed to help translate scientific discoveries into practice. as a medicine and food. So their job is to make sure that science is followed.
Right.
And whatever, they don't do anything. I mean, the FDA people, I've met so many of them, and some of them are my good friends. They don't make any rules. They make the rules based on science. And they want to make sure the science is followed. That's their job. Their Food and Drug Administration, they want to just make sure whatever, they don't make science. If scientific theory is there, so you present to them that this is what my science is, and this is what I think I'll maintain, like you're saying, how will I do the control, and how will I do this, and this is what I mean. And once you have established, they will look into the literature, and if somebody else has done, they will say, well, it matches, doesn't match, and how to reconcile. That's all they do. So that's it's important for us to understand, that's the process. Now, in terms of the ban and problem with the Ayurvedic products, well, there is a quality control. Right. So the first issue is the quality control. If you have a messy product because you didn't do a good way of washing your jadi booty, and you did not make sure that your instruments are clean, and you got some contamination, well, that will be a problem, not only the mercury and lead and arsenic, but anything else. If you get some insects in it, that will be the same problem. So I think if you do a messy thing, you will have problem. So that's one label of problem. I think that can be easily solved. Right. That's not a scientific issue. That's just an issue of business practice. Right. How you technology, how you're applying. But there is a problem with the real problem with Ayurveda is that they do have metals in their products. They intentionally put that in. And when you do atomic absorption spectroscopy, you will see them. And nobody will deny that, they normally put like gold and silver, copper, but they do put arsenic. Also, they put mercury. They also put lead. Now, silver, I think people are willing to tolerate here, even though it's heavy metal and it actually could be dangerous also. But that's like more familiar. But these other ones are very difficult. So they have looked at it. Heavy metals are problem. I mean, if somebody is given silver, we have done that experiment in our lab. We have done at the cellular level. It's very toxic. If you have silver, you treat cells with silver, they're dead. So I think they are right about it. Now the difference between Ayurvedic metals, as they call, or as they call Bhasma actually, and unfortunately, Ayurvedic people, like I said at the very beginning, there's a good requirement of translating your system into the scientific system, and then use proper words. Because if you use wrong words, you say heavy metals, well, it's a big problem. You're going to be banned. Right. But if you say that it is processed metal, we are using lead everywhere. We are using mercury, thermometer, and no problem. Arsenic is also being used so many places. But you have to say it properly. I think they say it's ash. Right. Well, that doesn't really help a lot, because it means that, you have just burned it down into powder and you're giving me powder. There's more problem. Yes. It is better to have mercury in a jar rather than in a powder that will flow around and get into my nose, get into my eyes, get into my ears. And that's like more dangerous. So I think this is one of the problems, is that it has not been communicated. Right. And as FDA or the scientific community in the United States should, they're doing their job of being concerned about it. But it is the job of the Indian Ayurvedic scientists and Indian scientists who may understand that, and unfortunately they don't. Right. So I have come up with some explanations. I have become Sanskrit acharya because I asked, all the Sanskrit people also say the same thing. Bhasma is just like an ash. No, it's not ash. Ash was one. It's like an ash, right, but it's not ash. It is a processed material. Now, when it is processed material, it can be consumed. A lot of processed things that otherwise you would not touch them, but since they are processed, you have no problem. We have all kinds of polymers around, tiny polymers, but then you make those polymers in clothes and you use them as the clothes. It's not a problem. You use for plates. And so this is also like that. The Bhasma is a processed material, at least in English. You can say detoxified material will be actually better. Right. So it is detoxified. Botulinum toxin, damn thing, is a very, 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 very toxic.
Right.
But we give them as a medicine because they know this has been put in the formulation in such a way that it's a medicine. It is also the Bhasma is a formulation of some kind. I think if we explain in that way, it will be acceptable. But you have to create for FDA, to go back to your question about FDA. FDA, if you tell them the science, they're just going to follow the science.
Right.
You say, I showed them in my lab that, and other people have done with gold particles. They call it nanomedicine. And they showed how it works.
Right.
It's a bioenhancer. It helps the cellular process. And we did that experiment. We did take a silver nano material, and we took Bhasma, which is also nanomaterial, and we treated them to the cells, and we saw that one of them kills 100%, another one retains 95%. So it's not toxic. Now, FDA will be very happy next time the product comes to use this assay, because exactly that's what FDA does.
Right.
If you give them an assay and they say, here is the science, and here is why my product works, no problems. FDA is actually very cooperative. I find them to be very, very cooperative.
So, I mean, your seminal work on Bhasma, because you mentioned about this right now, recently has received quite rave reviews, and you have used various modern scientific characterization techniques ranging from, thermogravimetry to spectroscopy to study the properties. So specifically with regards to one of your papers, in your paper in Open Nano in 2017, you have scientifically analyzed the physico-chemical properties of herbally prepared silver nanoparticles and its potential as a drug bioenhancer. Can you tell us a little about this, please?
Yeah, so actually, this is not our pioneering work, although we have been more systematic. And like I said, my understanding of and my respect for Ayurveda is more than just simply meeting some requirements. Right. So I think that our tone in the paper is a little bit different, and our results are a lot more than what we have published right now. So we are very, very confident about whatever we are talking about. One thing is that we analyzed and we showed them that it is kind of nanomaterial, and we got it the commercial products, right. And when we got this made, the silver nanoparticles in Professor Yaswant Pathak, who is a professor of pharmacy in University of South Florida, we got that material from him and we tested, and then we found one is toxic, another one is not toxic. Right. Now we looked at the characteristics from modern techniques. Whether they are X-ray diffraction or other kind of a spectroscopic measurement. We also try to do NMR. We didn't find any difference. I think we need to get more work. We need to do more concentration extraction and other things. But we use modern techniques to show that there is really these things are different. We found that the amount of metal is there. It's like maybe 65% or 50% of the Bhasma is a metal, but it's not metal only. There is a carbon, there is a hydrogen, there is nitrogen, which also shows that something has happened to this Bhasma in this process. And it's not toxic. That means it has been what they call it in Ayurvedic technology. It has been Sodhan has been done. It has been, again, Sodhan is not exactly purification, because again, that creates more problem. Sodhan basically means detoxification. It means Suddhi. Right. It has been Suddhi. Suddhi is not same as pure. When you say pure, it's been purified. That's what they say. It has been purified. I was talking to a Ayurvedic practitioner last night, and she said she's a Rasa Sastri. She has done masters, what is equivalent to MD in Ayurveda, and she's talking is purified. Right. I mean, the moment we use purified, you created a problem. Right. When you purified metals, you're telling me that is good? No, you have to say that detoxified. Yes. The Sodhan does not mean purified, although Suddhi sometimes means pure. But Suddhi means good. It is not bad. Right. And so I think going back to our paper, we have this approach to explain that. And we also did some other experiments in which we exactly looked at the mechanism by which what is happening. And so we had atomic force microscopy, in which you can look at the cells, their structure after treating with Bhasma, and like you were talking about control, without treating with Bhasma. We treat with something else. Also, we treat with some other metals. And we found that Bhasma has a characteristics. It makes, there is something called cell-tight, cell-cell tight junctions. And that really prevents anything from entering in, a mucosal layer. All over our body has this epithelial barrier. It doesn't allow everything to just go in, actually. So then we found that it actually makes that paracellular transport, as they call. Mostly the transport happens through transcytosis. It goes in the cell, it goes other side of it. But paracellular transportation between the cells. And so we found that actually Bhasma creates that gap. And when we put some dyes, we found the dyes are going through that. And so Bhasma is one of the mechanism of bioenhancing that we said is really being caused by that. But our research actually, which is not published yet, we have, like we were talking about earlier, genomes, where there is a proteomes and there is metabolomes, there is liposomes. That kind of omes are there. Are a lot of omes in science, which basically means like complex system. And so we have done that. Actually, we did this research with a scientist at CDC. And so we are, and that also is very helpful, by the way. If you work with multiple disciplines, not me, but in this paper that we have an engineer who is a bioengineer. So he doesn't have any other interest except that he is a good engineer and he's working with us on some of the aspects of it. The same way, when we are going to publish our paper with the analysis of the mass spectroscopy, which was done at CDC, and then people will see that this is not something somebody just trying to sneak away or sneak out of something or sneak in, but something that we are engaging people, and I think that is why we are getting a little bit better traction there.
Wonderful, wonderful. You mentioned about the retention of dye, and that is something which and also the junctions between cells. So I was very curious to know about what you see as the underlying physical mechanism of this process. I mean, and how is it that this retention is augmented, for instance, and how does it relate back to the ancient formulations of the efficacy of Bhasm and such products essentially within such practices?
I mean, it's much easier for me to explain the retention of the dye and how did it work with Bhasma people. I was talking to an expert last night, because he heard my talk in one of the Council of Ayurvedic Research here in the United States, and they had organized three-day symposium last month. And I was a speaker, and there were a lot of people, Ayurvedic people, and I think I got like a response from all over the world, believe it or not. And including one from NIH. The program officer of NIH wrote to me about this. So actually, you're right. I think I didn't realize that this is getting that much fascination of people, the fancier people. But it is getting. But so the first question of your retention of the dye is kind of easy. Like I said, tight junctions open. And these dyes are going through that. So we capture them in the process, and we don't find these dyes anywhere except in that space. So we can just look at under microscope. That's kind of easy. Anything that is passing through that, we know that is where it is going. Now the question of how does this now be connected to Ayurveda? I asked this person who her name is Ritika Shah, and she's an Ayurvedic doctor. And I was asking her, how did he use Bhasma? I want to know. I don't know that much about it, how they use. From my understanding, Bhasma is usually, I would say rarely used by itself. It's always used in some formulation. And I know a little bit about formulation because I work in the formulation area. So the different things have different roles to play. Sometimes something stabilizes, sometimes something activates, sometimes something facilitates. Is pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics is also important. So at least one aspect that we know, from our research, is that it opens the paracellular space. That means it allows the drugs to go inter. At least one role is done. Now, what I don't know, and I'm fortunately, Dr. Ritika Shah has volunteered to collaborate with us, and we will learn more from her point of view how the practice is. But there are different kind of bhasmas. So if I just showed the silver, then they use silver everywhere, but they don't use it. And I asked her that question. And so she jumped into the purification stuff, which is kind of a problem. So my feeling is that bhasma, different kind of bhasmas, arsenic bhasma and mercury bhasma, lead bhasma, gold bhasma, copper bhasma, all these things are, they probably have some characteristics depending, and that depends on how you make them, because every bhasma is not exactly made the same way. The different herbs are used, and those herbs in combination with bhasma have different interaction with different tissues, at least even in the bioenhancing mode. And they may actually have some biochemical role also, which I think we need to explore. So the field is wide open, so much to do.
Absolutely. And your study also kind of goes into this very specific, I think, thermogravimetric study on the weight loss of bhasma and its decomposition when we increase the temperature. So there are some kind of textual characterizations of bhasma. So one of them happens to be apunar bhavata, which is the incapability of a substance to regain its original metallic form, which is seen in the context of bhasma in ancient Indian texts. Have there been kind of correlations with these characterizations with, let's say, the textual evidences? And there are various other attributes also. For instance, varitaratam, which is the tendency to float and and spread on cold and still water, and let's say nischandratvam, which is the lusterlessness of bhasma as well. So there are various attributes and properties. So how do they relate to, let's say, characterization studies that have been done, and what all kinds of characterizations have been done of bhasma as it stands?
So, I mean, you asked so lovely questions. There is a minefield of research opportunity and scientific advancement, product development, taking care of public health. This minefield, and I'm just so aghast as to why Indian scientists, we are 1.4 billion people, we can almost study everybody and everything about everybody, but I don't know why they don't do it. Now, going back to your question of various kind, like floating, so this creates nanoparticles. As a physicist, you would know that when things become circular, or what is the other word for that? The round, when they become round, anything, it increases surface area, right? So when the surface area is increased, obviously the thing that touches the let's say water, aqueous thing, is only a small portion of it, and so it will float. All it explains is that the metal, rather than just metal particles, it has now become a nano, circular, globular, and its shape has changed, so it will float. Anything you can put, anything, if you put even a ball or something in water, and if it is a ball, it will more likely float than if you just put a piece of it, the same weight. So because it increases the volume, surface area has increased, volume has increased. So it's like a simple physics phenomenon. You also talked about, what was the other thing you talked about? Nischandra, and there was another third
the lusterlessness as well. The
lusterlessness, I will come to that. But there was another thing you said?
The regaining, the non-ability to regain its metallic.
Oh, okay, very good. So let's talk about lusterlessness first. So what is luster? It's nischandra. Now, so people think that it's whatever the metallic thing was, that what was shiny is gone. But actually, it at the further label, this is just a visual. At the label of chemistry, the intensity of something has gone. Intensity is not only light, like what we see, but also its intensity of means toxicity. I define it as a toxicity. And why I say this? Now, this is where I was saying that I became a Sanskritacharya. I am a chemist, and so I think the atoms, the word for atom definition of atom is there's something that cannot be destroyed. That's how it came. Akshar, by meaning akshar, means it cannot be destroyed. So I have claimed myself to be a Sanskrit etymologist, and I even tell that etymology really may be coming from etymology.
Right.
Etymology is maybe coming from etymology, and then maybe just call it. So now with that background and my clarifications, I delved into defining what Bhasma really means. Bha means light, just like Bhaskar, and Ma means no. That means light. Nischandra exactly means that. The light in this case is not just light like what we are talking about, really light, but its intensity. And intensity means toxicity, because that intensity like charges. When you see in a metallic form, it can take the ionic form. And ionic form is what is toxic. So its ionization has been taken away. And that's the Nischandra for me as a chemist. And how does that happen? Will answer your other questions. Why it cannot be returned back. So I employed various colleagues of mine in my department. Actually, I made a team of like half a dozen inorganic chemists, organic chemists, biochemists, physical chemists. And one of the inorganic chemists, I'm forgetting his name, David Mankey. David Mankey, he studied it. And, he studied, like something otherwise people won't study. But, since we were as a team, he studied it. And he said that first thing they do in traditional way of making, they put the metal in gomutra.
Okay.
Now, most people, oh my God, you're putting, like modern scientists, you're putting in this urine or something, But then he was very good. Actually, he's an inorganic chemist. He said, that, what that is doing, Balram? I said, what? He said, that because urine is a good source of nitrate.
Right. Yeah.
So they are doing nitrification or nitration of the Bhasma. So there's nitrates around. And then they put in gobar. That's another, they put in cow dung. Now, most people say, what are you trying to do here? The gobar is a rich source of sulfide. So when you have nitration, then you do sulfide group addition. It makes covalent bond. There is other processes like you were talking about, heating and beating and all that kind of stuff. That is, heating and beating is done to make it fine particles. But all these treatments, like initial treatment and then herbal treatment, is done to chemically modify the surface of the Bhasma. So it makes physically, it makes a particle, a nanoparticle, which is round and circular, and then chemically it treats it so that surface gets modified. And so it's chemical transformation that cannot be returned back in ordinary chemicals. Of course, you can treat with all kind of chemicals and get it back, which is what we are trying to do, by the way. We're trying to reverse it to find out what in NMR as to what are the things on the surface. And since it is so tiny and so small that we have not gotten enough of that extraction, and we haven't done the process also, we need to treat with very heavy duty processes to extract what is in there. So we have tried to transform it back. Like you were saying, can it be turned back? Well, we have tried to do that because we want to get what are the chemicals, and we haven't been able to do that. We only are able to do X-ray, powder X-ray diffraction, and from that we are able to find what are the elements in there: carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, sulfide, and we find them. So that means it has been modified, it has been detoxified, it has intensity and toxicity has been removed, and will not go back. How much you try, it definitely will not go back in your body physiology.
Wonderful. So many things, so many aspects and nuances.
Thank you for watching. You can subscribe here and also hit the bell icon to make sure you get notified. To donate, please click this button.